So this is our podcast episode, Gilgamesh, Friendship, Death, and Being Human. I'm Ethan Mehler.
I'm Zachry Turnbo.
And I'm Luiz Guerrero.
And today we are going to be teaching you on how Gilgamesh, really relates to your life. So sort of comparing this to a human type of thing or a human relationship, a real life type of thing. When I think about unlikely friends, kind of like Gilgamesh and Indiku, I think about my friend R2 who showed up on my doorstep when his mom knocked on my door when I was about 12 years old. This is a sort of unexpected friendship, kind of like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it just, sort of like how Indiku and Gilgamesh get separated at the end. That's sort of how our friendship is right now, but I kind of missed his presence as we speak.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing.
Yeah.
And as you can tell from what Ethan introduced to us today, we are going to be diving into the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is basically a story that was written over 4,000 years ago. And it's kind of sort of crazy when you think about it, because this ancient poem is basically the first epic we know of, and yet it still asks questions that we as humans still ask and apply to our lives today. For example, what makes life meaningful? What does it mean to lose someone we love? And how do we cope with the fact that life isn't forever? So today, we're going to break down what happens in the story and why that still matters in our lifetime. And in order to answer these questions, we must evaluate what exactly this epic poem is about.
Yeah, and I sort of want to start out, give us a little character intro of Gilgamesh. A very high and mighty, arrogant king. Feels like he needs nothing. He doesn't need any help. But when they know there's a monster to be slain, when someone like Indiku joins the picture, it really shows the character of Gilgamesh and how arrogant he can be to start. But traveling together sort of creates that unbreakable bond that not many can break, and sort of that makes life worth living, a friendship that makes life worth living.
Yeah, and I kind of totally get where you're coming from. Once we get introduced to this character of Gilgamesh, he kind of just comes off as this this arrogant, a very strong-willed character. But once you see that shift of Gilgamesh and Enkidu becoming friends, you can kind of see the tone of the story completely shifts. Suddenly, this once arrogant king has someone who kind of grounds him in a way, and I think that's very interesting to look at. Then, as you can see, they kind of sort of develop this bromance that some modern scholars call it, and I think it's very intriguing. And the bond is then strengthened when they go on these large and epic battles together. For example, when they take on Humamba, who is the monster who guards the forest. And this is a battle that proves themselves and gives them a name that people will remember. And then when the goddess Ishtar sends down the bull from heaven, they fight side by side and defeat it too. So it kind of just solidify these two characters as legends and how their friendship kind of helped them defeat these battles together. But eventually, there's always a tragedy that comes in, and unfortunately for their many victories, there came a consequence within their friendship.
Yeah, when you look at the story, as a whole, I totally agree with you, Zach. When you look at the story as a whole, Gilgamesh's arrogance and pride still has a price to pay, because honestly, when you're prideful, you're going to pay prices for things that you might not have intended for. So one of them has to pay the price, and ultimately it's Indiku that dies a slow, painful death. Arrogance has a price, pride has a price, and Gilgamesh learns that he'll have to pay the price just like Indiku had to pay the price, and he will later.
Yeah, I feel like this is where the story really takes place. It changes all of it until now because of the whole battles and the glory Gilgamesh takes. But until Enkidu dies, everything's impacted. Gilgamesh goes from fighting monsters and magical beings to, and is like literally fighting against time and death itself. But he goes on to his life-changing, on his search for a way to become an immortal, because he can't accept the idea of losing someone. In this case, I would say his best friend. At the end, he learns that nobody can really escape morality. I feel like the real legacy we can leave behind is through actions and the impressions we leave on others.
Totally. And sort of connecting this, sort of making the round trip. Gilgamesh is an almighty king who doesn't feel like he needs to live because he's already done it all until he meets Indiku, which proves to be the most valuable friendship. And I think this story honestly tells us that a good friendship honestly makes a life worth living. Truly iron sharpening iron.
Like, I totally agree with what you just said there. And then I also wanted to connect to the story here is that when Gilgamesh goes through this change, it kind of presents like this all-powerful, untouchable hero kind of turning into someone that suddenly feels very vulnerable. And one of the stories off the top of my head that I can relate this to in modern day movies is the movie Avengers Endgame. As we know, one of the main characters, the main protagonist, built throughout this whole series is Tony Stark, and that is a very that's a character, you know, who's all about ego and his fame, and is very like witty when it comes to his smarts. But eventually, through all these movies, he goes through a bunch of loss and losing a bunch of people that he cares about. And you kind of see this shift where he grows into someone who sacrifices himself for others. And I think that's something that is very true and reflected onto Gilgamesh. Because, you know, he goes through the same thing essentially. When Enkidu dies, he isn't just grieving his friend, but he is also terrified of his own death. And there is a line in the story that I saw that was pretty interesting when reading this text is, "Shall I not die too? Am I not like Enkidu?" And I just think that moment is very raw and human. And it's when the superhero realizes that, you know, you're not you're not invincible after all, essentially. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. I completely agree with that. I just feel like Gilgamesh was really was really like the world's first superhero story, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was kind of like a Superman, kind of like he's godlike, strong, brave, but in this case, he's a flawed man. Well, I mean, what makes him different and unforgivable isn't the fights or battles; it's the grief, the growth, and also the fact that he feels human in some ways. That's why through all this time and years, we can still connect this story to him in any kind of way. So that kind of reminds me of a kind of a quote that I got from Tablet 10 or book Tablet 10 from Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh. So this is what Gilgamesh says. He says, "Do we build a house forever? Do we build a home forever? Do brothers divide an inheritance forever? Do disputes prevail in the land forever? Do rivers rise and flood forever?" And that was from the Tablet 10 of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I believe it was like line 230 to 236.
Powerful.
Yeah. And that's a really good line that you brought up. It kind of touched on what I said earlier. It really hits at the heart of the epic, because to me it's reminding us that, you know, nothing really lasts forever and not everyone's invincible. I mean, not no kingdom, not wealth, not even the relationships we have. You know, nothing lasts really forever. But instead of that being depressing, it's almost a challenge. If nothing lasts, then the meaning comes from how we live in the time that we do have and how we are spending it in the present. And it's like Gilgamesh is being forced to realize that immortality isn't about living forever, but it's about the mark you leave behind, and kind of like how superheroes are remembered for what they stood for even after they're gone. So I think that was very interesting.
For sure.
Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful. And, you know, I think we can take this back to take our friendships a little bit more seriously on a day-to-day basis, because honestly, you don't know when that person is going to leave your life. Maybe they'll pass away, but like, it's just, we got to really enjoy the connections around us, because you don't know when you're going to lose it.
For us today, the idea of chasing mortality, I think, can look a little different, because maybe it's through money, fame, or even trying to stay young forever. But like you said, Gilgamesh kind of shows us that those things won't really satisfy you in the end. And what actually lasts are the connections we made and the legacy we leave behind. You know, so all those battles that he fought and ultimately the bond that he kind of shared with Enkidu was kind of something that was special to him. And kind of, it wasn't about how strong you are or like how invincible you are, but it's the connections that last. So
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you guys. I think what is powerful about Gilgamesh actually achieving immortality, but not like living forevermore, but by his story that lasts thousands of years. And here we are still talking about him till this day, in the year 2025, which shows us that it is something important. The way we live on, and is through the impact we make on others. It can be through friendship and through the legacy we leave behind, which is true for us as it was for Gilgamesh.
And sort of wrapping this whole thing up, you know, we compare this story to our actual lives. That, you know, this world is, you know, it's not gonna last forever. Our time on this earth is not gonna last forever. There are things that matter around all of us, and I think you got to keep those things first. And when you keep those things first and don't chase the fleeting things, the money, the fame, or just trying to stay young forever, trying to live forever, I think really honing in on those important things are really what makes us, you know, what makes us connected to this story.
Yeah, that was really well said. And so I just wanted to say that while reading this book, I think it was very awesome to kind of like for us to get together and do this, because it kind of just helps paint a better picture of what experience did Gilgamesh go through, and how the real value and lesson that is taught is, to keep these connections and kind of value what really matters in life. So I think it was very awesome that we got to discuss this today, and I want to thank everyone for tuning into our podcast. This is a very cool book or story to read. And before we go, I'd like to leave with y'all a question: what friendship in your life has shaped you the way Enkidu shaped Gilgamesh? And then what's something to think about until next time?
All right.
Or did that
once again, thank y'all for tuning in.
Thank you again.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, I think that's a question y'all should ask yourselves in y'all's life. But that was the podcast episode, and that was Ethan Mehler. I am signing off.
That's Zachry Turnbo signing off.
And Luiz Guerrero signing off.